I'd never met anyone like him in my life, to be honest. I just went to the woods to clear my head. I had no other reason. As a 61-year-old woman, I've learnt to appreciate the value of peace and quiet. I saw him as I walked along a narrow path. He was leaning against a tree. His face was tilted slightly upwards. The sunlight made his skin glow like gold. For a moment I just stood there. My heart almost stopped. He looked to be in his 50s, maybe a little older, but how could anyone be so manly, so damn handsome? He was huge, like he had the strength to take on anything in the world. His muscular arms, broad shoulders, and deep dark skin were immaculate, like a work of art. Let me tell you about that day. The one that changed everything. And before I go on, make sure you subscribe to my channel and watch this video till the end, cause this story is about to get pretty wild. When he looked at me, I could hardly believe it was real. His eyes had this warm, deep quality, as if he didn't just see me, but could feel me. He smiled slightly and his voice had this deep, resonant tone. Nice day, huh? I didn't know what to say. The words were stuck on my lips. Yeah, it really is, I finally managed to say, but there was something else bubbling up inside me. This pull inside me. He took a few steps closer, and without even noticing, I took a step back. I don't want to scare you, I said, his voice soft but confident as hell. No. It's all right, I stammered, but my heart was pounding in my chest. He raised his hand and gently repaired a stray strand of hair. The wind had messed up the touch. It was brief, innocent even, but it stirred something in me. It was like something that had been asleep for years had suddenly woken up. My name's Marcus, he said, his voice deep and warm, like a sound that echoed in my ears. I looked into his eyes and then remembered I had to say something. I'm Charlotte, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Charlotte. The way he said my name, like he was unlocking a secret, was almost too nice a name. It suits you. I felt my cheeks flush. After all these years, no one had ever made me feel like this. With just a few words, thank you, I said with a shy smile. Do you come here often? He asked, his hands in his pockets, but his body was fully facing me, not taking his eyes off me for a second. I said no. Get away from me for a second. No, I said honestly. I don't really come here often. I just needed to clear my head. I think we're both looking for the same thing, he said, taking another step closer until he was almost next to me. But what we found might be a little different. My breath caught. What do you think we've found? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, shaking like hell. Marcus leaned in a little, his face coming closer to mine. Maybe something we didn't even know we needed, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I was so shocked I couldn't move. All I could hear was the sound of my breathing getting faster. His eyes moved from my eyes to my lips and then back to my eyes. Charlotte, he said slowly, almost like he was warning me. If you don't want this, you'd better say it now. But the words had made me forget to say anything at that moment. It felt like all my logic had gone. I closed my eyes and tilted my head slightly, fighting the familiar hesitation that rose inside me. Marcus seemed to take my hesitation as a kind of approval. His big hands cupped the sides of my face and he kissed me. The kiss was both passionate and surprisingly gentle, as if he was calling me but also trying to understand me. His hands slid from my shoulders down to my back and I could feel him completely enveloping me. My heart was racing so fast it felt like the whole world had stopped, and there was only Marcus and me left. Why are you doing this? I whispered breathlessly between kisses. Marcus stopped, resting his forehead against mine. Because the moment I saw you, nothing else mattered. I saw you, nothing else mattered. Those words broke down all the walls inside me. His hands, his touch, his voice, it all created this unreal feeling of closeness. Is this real? I asked, still unsure, but not pulling away. It's the most real thing that's ever happened to me, he said, looking deep into my eyes. The tension between us was growing. The pull was almost like a physical force. Despite the tiny bit of fear inside me, I couldn't stop wanting him. Marcus's hands slowly slid down my back. I could feel his fingers brushing against the fabric of my t-shirt. His touch was so light, it was as if he hadn't been there at all. Shirt. His touch was so light it felt like a breeze against my skin. To be so close to you, Charlotte, he whispered, his voice deep and low. I don't think I've ever felt anything like this before. His words were as powerful as the warmth of his touch. Marcus's face was still so close to mine. I could feel his breath on my forehead like a warm touch against my skin. I parted my lips, but no words came out. After a short moment, his hands moved from my back and I felt his fingers reach the edge of my t-shirt. I could feel him gently grasping the fabric of my t-shirt. Do you want me to stop? He asked, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. I shook my head. No, I said, almost unsure. But I knew I didn't want him to stop. As his fingers slid under the edge of my t-shirt, I felt the cool air mix with the soft fabric of his shirt. I felt the cool air mix with the warmth of my skin as his large, calloused hand moved slowly up my back and I could feel my heartbeat quickening. I took a deep breath, but even the air filling my lungs wasn't enough. Your skin is like telling a story, he said, his hand slowly moving from my back to my sides as I felt the tip of his finger touch the lower part of my ribs. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the tree. Marcus, I murmured, unable to stop myself from getting lost in his arms. I'm here, he replied, his voice so soft. I opened my eyes and caught his gaze again. Just here for you. As his hands moved over my skin, I felt his warmth deep inside me, each movement of his palms creating a new vibration in me. For a moment, his hands rested on my hip, and his Marcus smiled, a dangerous charm in his eyes. Maybe you are in the right place at the right time. I wanted to say something, but before I could, he moved faster and pressed his lips to my neck. I can't even describe the feeling of his warm, wet lips. I can't even describe the feeling of his warm, wet lips on my skin. I tipped my head back and took a deep breath. You don't have to be so beautiful, he said. His lips moved from my neck to my chin, but when I saw you, I couldn't stop myself. At that moment, his hands started to move more decisively, sliding up from my waist. I felt his fingers move from my back to my shoulders under my t-shirt. Every touch made me feel his skin. Marcus, this is too fast, I said, but the moment the words left my lips I realized it wasn't true. Let's slow down then, he replied, pausing for a moment and bringing his face closer to mine. But don't pull away. I lifted my hands and touched his chest as I felt his large, firm body under my hands. Any resistance I had broke completely. My fingers moved away. I started, but I couldn't finish the sentence. His lips found mine again, this time with more passion, more open than before. At that moment I felt completely surrendered. The words were just whispers, reinforcing the moment. Marcus's presence pulled me away from the real world and fully into the now. As his hands slid under my t-shirt, my heart was racing with every beat. My heart was racing with every touch. My eyes were locked on him. Every nerve in my body was responding to him being so close. I could feel his body heat, every muscle tense with energy. He stopped for a moment, his hands on my waist, his eyes locked with mine. I don't think you're against this, he said, his voice thick with confidence. Before I fully understood what was happening, Marcus lowered his head and pulled his t-shirt off over his head. His lower bout of skin was barely perceptible as he pulled the t-shirt off over his head. His lower bout of skin was barely perceptible. He was so masculine and strong that my eyes almost went dark for a second. He threw his shirt to the floor, and as I watched every muscle on his body, I couldn't resist his determined and confident demeanor. Yes, I wanted to be with every part of me in this moment. Marcus leaned in and grabbed my waist and slowly pulled me towards him. The hardness of his touch was like a magnet, and I couldn't help but want to hold on to him and hold on to him. And hold on to him and hold on to him and hold on to him. And hold on to him 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 and hold on to him. I could feel the weight of his body on mine. Being with you feels more natural than anything, he whispered as his hands began to explore my body. My heart was racing, my mind was foggy, and my feelings were growing heavier. Even though I hesitated, my body instinctively responded to him as my hands slid over Marcus's solid body, my palms following the warmth of his skin. I followed the warmth of his skin, longing for it. Are we ready for this? I asked, my voice low and shaky, but before I waited for an answer my fingers rested on his muscular shoulders. Just feel it, he said, bringing his lips close to mine for a moment. We both want this. His body with every move made me forget everything around us. As my hands moved to his waist, I lifted his back and pushed him up, a sense of determination in my eyes. For me this moment wasn't about giving in, it felt like the right step. Then all of a sudden I felt like I was being forced to give in. It felt like the right step, and then all the physical attraction and touches merged into the emotional intensity. The closeness between us combined with a deep emotional connection, making every movement more passionate. We had both reached the peak of excitement, and in an instant it exploded, our bodies intertwined, our senses colliding. In that moment everything else vanished. Our deep breaths mingled as our hearts beat fast, and every cell in our bodies felt this intense, indescribable pleasure. My breath came in quick waves. I felt Marcus's warm skin as my hands moved over his body. My body was still trembling, rising with every movement. I took deep, broken breaths. Marcus, I whispered, my voice. I was so excited the words couldn't come out right. My eyes half closed, my body pressed closer to him, feeling him from every angle. He was struggling to breathe. His voice came from deep inside me. Charlotte, he murmured, his hands on my waist. Every movement of my muscles drove me crazy. I felt you everywhere. We were so close, so wrapped up in each other. The heat of our bodies mixed together. I can feel you everywhere. We were so close, so wrapped up in each other. The heat from our bodies blending together. The strength of his body. Every movement touched me deeply. Our rapid breaths intensified the tension. For a moment I almost screamed, but I held myself back. After a while we slowly pulled away from each other, but the distance between us was still connected by the touch of our hands. We lay side by side, our breaths still fast, our tremors still loud. Side by side, our breaths still fast, our trembling bodies close, but this time more peaceful, more calm. As we looked at each other, our breaths mixing, our bodies still close, carrying each other's warmth. I looked up at the sky. It was vast and endless, but it was also peaceful, calm. In that moment there was a feeling of peace within me. The man beside me showed me that everything could be different, more special now. We could be together. Marcus looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and then slowly said, "Sometimes you don't know exactly what life has to offer, but then all of a sudden everything makes sense. You realize how weak we are, but also how strong we are." The echo of his words stirred something in me. As I looked at him I smiled. Sometimes when you live a moment you think you weren't expecting it, but that moment finds you, it stays with you and never goes away, I said, putting my feelings into words. We remained silent for a while, but the silence felt like peace. It was as if we were lost in the moment, with the sky and ourselves becoming one. Becoming one, we kept looking up at the sky, our breaths calming, growing closer, building a deeper bond. If you've made it this far, I'm sure you're hooked on the story. There's so much more to come and you won't want to miss it. Hit the follow button and turn on notifications so you can be the first to dive into my next mysterious tale. Your support means the world to me.